My name is Nathaniel Whitmore, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm 70 years old, and I never imagined I'd live to tell this story. If you're hearing this, it's because I finally found the courage to reveal the truth about what happened on the most painful day of my life. It was a sunny Saturday in June when my only daughter, Celeste, married Alexander Goldwyn. I had saved every penny for 2 years to buy a decent suit for the occasion. It wasn't the finest, but it was clean and pressed. Celeste had always been the light of my life. I raised her alone after my wife died when she was just 3 years old. I worked as a gardener my whole life, tending to the gardens of wealthy mansions, always dreaming of giving my daughter everything I never had. The ceremony was held at one of the most luxurious estates I'd ever seen. Imported flowers, champagne that cost more than my monthly salary, guests dressed in clothes worth more than my house. I felt like a fish out of water, but I was there for the love of my daughter. During the ceremony, I tried to catch Celeste's attention, smile at her, show her I was proud. But she avoided my gaze the entire time. The explosion happened at the reception. I had approached her to congratulate her, maybe take a picture together. That's when she turned to me, her eyes filled with rage and shame, and screamed in front of all the guests, "I'm disgusted to live here with you." The words echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. "You embarrass me. My whole life I've had to endure your rags, your miserable house, your pathetic poverty. Now I've finally managed to escape that horrible life." The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of eyes stared at me with pity and contempt. Alexander, my now son-in-law, put his arm around Celeste with a smile that couldn't hide his satisfaction. "Darling," he said softly, but loud enough for me to hear, "you don't need to worry about that anymore. You're a Goldwyn now." I left there in silence, my heart broken into millions of pieces. I drove my old pickup truck back to my small house, the same house where I'd raised Celeste with all the love in my heart. I sat in my worn armchair, staring at the photos on the mantel, pictures of Celeste's birthdays, her graduation, moments when she still smiled at me with genuine love. That's when I found the envelope. It had been slipped under my door while I was at the wedding. My name was written in elegant handwriting, and inside was a letter that would change everything. "Your true inheritance awaits you. The poverty you chose is not who you really are." Attached was an old brass key and an address I didn't recognize. I held that key in my trembling hands, wondering who could have sent such a thing on the worst day of my life. Little did I know that this mysterious envelope would be the beginning of the most extraordinary journey of my 70 years on this earth, and that everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my daughter's cruel rejection was about to be turned upside down. The next morning I woke up on my old couch, still wearing that wedding suit that now felt like a costume from a play I never wanted to be in. The envelope was still clutched in my hand, and for a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. But there it was, real as the ache in my chest from Celeste's words. I made myself a cup of coffee with shaking hands and read the letter again. The paper was expensive, the kind I'd only seen when I worked at the biggest estates. The address was downtown, in the financial district where I'd never had any reason to go, but it was that key that really puzzled me. It was old, maybe antique, with intricate engravings that seemed familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream. I tried calling Celeste 3 times that morning. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. The 4th time, a man answered, "Alexander, Mr. Whitmore." His voice was cold, clinical. "Celeste doesn't wish to speak with you. I think it's best if you respect her decision and give her some space." The line went dead before I could respond. Around noon, I decided to drive to the address on the letter. What did I have to lose? My daughter had already made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me. As I drove through the city in my beat-up truck, I couldn't help but notice how out of place I looked among the luxury cars and well-dressed people. The building was one of those tall glass towers that seemed to touch the sky. The lobby was all marble and gold, with security guards in suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. I showed the letter to the receptionist, a young woman who looked at me like I was lost. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, checking her computer. Her expression changed completely. "Oh my goodness, yes, they've been expecting you. Please, take the express elevator to the 47th floor. Ms. Thornfield will see you immediately." The elevator ride felt like ascending to another world. When the doors opened, I found myself in an office that was bigger than my entire house. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Nathaniel," she said, standing up with a warm smile. "My name is Margaret Thornfield. I've been looking for you for over 30 years. I must have looked confused because she gestured for me to sit down and poured me a glass of water. "I represent the estate of the Whitmore family," she continued, "one of the wealthiest families in American history. And you, Nathaniel, are the last surviving heir to a fortune that has been waiting for you since 1975. I nearly choked on my water. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake. I'm just a gardener. I've been poor my whole life." "There's no way." She opened a thick folder and pulled out a black and white photograph. My breath caught in my throat. It showed a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing in front of a mansion that looked like something from a movie. The boy had my eyes, my nose. It was me, but I had no memory of ever being in a place like that. "This was your childhood home, Nathaniel, the Whitmore estate in Connecticut. You lived there until you were 18 when you left." She paused, studying my face carefully. "Do you remember any of this?" I stared at the photo, and for a moment I could almost smell roses and hear the sound of fountain water. But then it was gone, like trying to hold on to smoke. I don't understand. I remember growing up in foster care, working odd jobs as a teenager." Margaret nodded sympathetically. "There was an accident when you were 18. You suffered severe head trauma. The memories of your early life were damaged. Your family assumed you had died in that accident. But you survived, Nathaniel. You've been surviving on your own for over 50 years, never knowing who you really were." She pulled out another document, a bank statement that made my head spin, numbers with so many zeros I couldn't even count them properly. "This is your inheritance, Nathaniel. $500 million, plus properties, investments, and assets that have been growing for decades. You are one of the richest men in America, and you never knew it." I sat there in stunned silence, thinking about my daughter's words from the night before, about the shame in her eyes when she looked at me. All this time, while she was embarrassed by my poverty, I had been this. But Margaret wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. "There's something else you need to know, Nathaniel. Your new son-in-law, Alexander Goldwyn, he's been looking for you too." I drove home from that meeting in a complete daze. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over twice just to catch my breath. $500 million. The number kept echoing in my head like a broken record. Me, Nathaniel Whitmore, the man who counted every penny to buy groceries, who patched his own clothes because he couldn't afford new ones. Margaret had given me a thick envelope full of documents, photographs, and legal papers that supposedly proved everything she had told me. But as I sat in my little kitchen that evening, staring at these papers spread across my worn wooden table, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all some elaborate scam. People like me don't suddenly become millionaires. Life doesn't work that way. I called the law office 3 times that night, but each time I hung up before anyone answered. What if this was some sick joke? What if someone had heard about what happened at the wedding and decided to play a cruel prank on the heartbroken old man? The shame of falling for such a thing would be worse than Celeste's rejection. The next morning, I tried calling my daughter again. This time, a woman answered, probably one of Alexander's staff. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mrs. Goldwyn is not available to speak with you. She's asked that you not call again." Mrs. Goldwyn. The name hit me like a slap. My little girl, who used to call me Daddy and beg me to push her higher on the swing set, was now Mrs. Goldwyn and couldn't be bothered to speak to her own father. That afternoon, I noticed a black sedan parked across from my house. The windows were tinted, and it had been there for hours. When I went to check my mailbox, the car started up and drove away slowly. But an hour later, it was back. This had never happened before in my quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson from next door came over around dinner time. She's lived here for 40 years and knows everyone's business. "Nate," she said, looking concerned, "there have been some fancy cars driving around asking about you. Men in expensive suits, wanting to know your schedule when you come and go. I didn't like the look of them, so I didn't tell them anything." My blood ran cold. If Margaret was telling the truth about the inheritance, and if Alexander somehow knew about it. No, that was impossible. How could he know about something I had just found out about myself? That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. At 3 a.m., I heard footsteps on my front porch. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept to the window. There was no one there, but taped to my front door was another envelope. Inside was a bank statement with my name on it. My simple checking account, which usually had maybe $300 in it, now showed a balance of $50,000. There was only one transaction, a deposit made that morning with a note that read, "Just the beginning of what is rightfully yours. MT. I stared at that number until my eyes burned. $50,000. More money than I had ever seen in my entire life, just sitting there in my account like it belonged there. Margaret hadn't been lying. This was real. But instead of joy, I felt something close to panic. I had lived my entire adult life as a poor man. I knew how to stretch a dollar, how to fix things instead of replacing them, how to find dignity in honest work, even when that work didn't pay much. This money, this inheritance, it felt like putting on clothes that didn't fit. And then there was Celeste, my daughter, who had screamed at me about my poverty, who had been so ashamed of our simple life. If this money was real, if I really was wealthy, then everything she had said to me was based on a lie. But would she even care? Or would she just see dollar signs where her father used to be? I thought about Alexander's cold voice on the phone, about those mysterious cars watching my house. Margaret had said he was looking for me too. Why would a wealthy man like Alexander Goldwyn care about an old gardener like me? Unless he somehow knew about the inheritance before I did. The thought sent chills down my spine. What if Alexander hadn't fallen in love with Celeste at all? What if he had known who I really was from the beginning? What if my daughter's fairy tale romance was actually something much darker? I looked at that bank statement again, at those impossible numbers that represented a life I couldn't remember living. Part of me wanted to march back to Margaret's office, demand my full inheritance, and show up at Celeste's new mansion to prove that I wasn't the poor, pathetic man she thought I was. But a bigger part of me was terrified. Terrified of what this money might mean, of what Alexander might do if he really was after it, and most of all, terrified that even with all the wealth in the world, I still might not be able to win back my daughter's love. The morning after I found that bank statement, I was sitting on my front porch with my coffee, trying to make sense of everything, when a sleek silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. It was Margaret Thornfield, but she wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark suit got out of the passenger seat and scanned the neighborhood like he was looking for threats. "Good morning, Nathaniel," Margaret said as she approached. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but we need to talk, and I was afraid you might not come back to the office." I invited them inside, suddenly embarrassed by my simple furniture and faded wallpaper. The man in the suit stayed by the door, his eyes constantly moving. Margaret sat across from me at my kitchen table and opened her briefcase. "I can see you're overwhelmed," she said gently. "Most people would be. But Nathaniel, time is not on our side. There are complications with your inheritance that we need to address immediately." She pulled out a thick folder labeled Goldwyn Enterprises, and my blood went cold. "Your son-in-law's company has been in serious financial trouble for the past 2 years. What looks like a thriving business empire is actually built on debt and bad investments. Alexander is facing bankruptcy, and he knows it." I stared at the financial documents she spread across my table. Even with my limited understanding of business, I could see the pattern: massive losses hidden by creative accounting, loans that couldn't be repaid, investors who were getting nervous. But here's what's truly disturbing, Margaret continued. 3 months ago, Alexander hired a private investigation firm, not to investigate business competitors or market opportunities. He hired them to find you. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. That's impossible. He didn't even know I existed until Celeste introduced us 6 months ago. Margaret shook her head grimly. Alexander has known about the Whitmore fortune for years. His father, Richard Goldwyn, was the lawyer who handled your family's estate after your accident. Richard died 5 years ago, but before he died, he told Alexander about the missing heir who could claim a $500 million inheritance. I felt like the room was spinning. Are you saying that he targeted my daughter on purpose? I'm saying that Alexander Goldwyn researched every detail of your life for months before he accidentally met Celeste at that charity fundraiser. He knew exactly who she was, who her father was, and what she could potentially inherit. Your daughter thinks she married for love, Nathaniel, but Alexander married her for access to you. The pieces were falling into place like a horrible puzzle. That's why he encouraged her to cut ties with me. If she hates me, if she's ashamed of me, she'd be more likely to agree to sign legal documents without asking questions. Margaret nodded. Alexander has been working on forged power of attorney papers that would give him legal control over your inheritance. With Celeste as his wife, he planned to claim that you're mentally incompetent due to your age and memory issues, and that he should manage your affairs as your son-in-law. I stood up, pacing around my small kitchen. But I never signed anything. I barely knew the inheritance existed until yesterday. That's what makes this so urgent, Margaret said. Alexander doesn't know that you've been found yet. He's been operating under the assumption that you're still lost, still unaware of your true identity. But that window is closing fast. His investigators are getting closer, and once they realize you've been contacted... She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications. There's something else, Margaret said quietly. The way Alexander has been treating Celeste since the wedding. According to our sources, he's become controlling. She's not allowed to leave the house without security guards who report to him. She can't make phone calls without supervision. He's isolated her from her few friends, claiming it's for her own protection as a wealthy man's wife. My hands clenched into fists. He's keeping her prisoner. In all but name, yes. And Nathaniel, there's one more thing you need to know. Alexander isn't just after your money. According to the documents we've uncovered, he's been researching ways to eliminate complications in inheritance cases. People who have disappeared or died in convenient accidents. The room went dead silent, except for the ticking of my old kitchen clock. Margaret's security guard shifted uncomfortably by the door. Are you saying my daughter is in danger? Margaret met my eyes directly. I'm saying that once Alexander gets legal control of your inheritance, Celeste becomes a liability. She knows too much about his real motives, and she could contest any suspicious activity in court. But if something happened to her after the inheritance was transferred... I didn't let her finish. What do we need to do? We need to move fast. I can have the inheritance paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. Once you officially claim it, Alexander's forged documents become worthless. But more importantly, we need to warn Celeste before Alexander realizes his plan has been discovered. I thought about my daughter's cruel words at the wedding, about the shame in her eyes when she looked at me. She won't listen to me. She made it clear she wants nothing to do with her poor, embarrassing father. Margaret smiled sadly. But you're not poor anymore, Nathaniel. You're one of the richest men in America. And regardless of what Celeste said in her anger, she's still your daughter. And she's in danger. I looked around my simple kitchen, at the life I had built from nothing, at the photos of Celeste growing up on my refrigerator. In 24 hours, everything had changed. I wasn't just a heartbroken father anymore. I was a man with the power to save his daughter from a monster who had manipulated her into marriage. But first, I had to figure out how to reach her. before Alexander discovered that his carefully laid plan was about to crumble around him. That same afternoon, Margaret took me to a bank I had never heard of, Meridian Trust, tucked away in a part of downtown that screamed old money and older secrets. The building looked like it had been there since the 1800s, all marble columns and brass fixtures that gleamed like gold. "Your father opened an account here in 1974, just before your accident," Margaret explained as we walked through corridors lined with oil paintings of stern-looking men in expensive suits. "He had a feeling something might happen to him, so he left instructions that only you could access this particular vault." We stopped in front of a massive steel door that looked like it belonged in a fortress. The bank manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, inserted his key first, then gestured for me to use the brass key that had been in that mysterious envelope. My hands trembled as I turned the key. After all these years of not even remembering my real childhood, I was about to unlock secrets that my own father had hidden away for me. The vault was smaller than I expected, but what was inside took my breath away. Stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like evidence files were organized in neat piles, but it was the large manila envelope marked, "For my son, the truth about the Goldwins," that made my blood run cold. Margaret and I sat at a small table in the vault while I opened that envelope with shaking hands. The first thing I saw was a photograph that made me gasp. It showed a much younger version of Richard Goldwyn, Alexander's father, shaking hands with a man I somehow recognized as my own father. They were standing in front of what looked like a construction site. "Read the letter first," Margaret suggested quietly. My father's handwriting was strong and clear, even after all these decades. "My dear son Nathaniel, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and you have finally discovered your true identity. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to accept, but you must know the truth about the Goldwyn family and why they cannot be trusted. Richard Goldwyn was my business partner in 1973. We were developing a revolutionary farming technique that would have made both our families billions, but Richard betrayed me. He stole my research, filed the patents under his name alone, and when I threatened to expose him, he tried to have me killed. The accident you suffered wasn't an accident at all, son. Richard hired men to run you off that mountain road. They were supposed to kill you, but you survived. Your memory loss was a blessing in disguise. It kept you safe because everyone, including Richard, believed you had died. I spent my final years gathering evidence of Richard's crimes, but I died before I could bring him to justice. This evidence is now yours, along with legal documents that prove the Goldwyn fortune was built on stolen Whitmore innovations. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the paper steady. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about that accident that had stolen my memories, was a lie. Margaret handed me a glass of water. "There's more," she said gently. I picked up another document, a private investigator's report dated just 2 months ago. Alexander's photo was paperclipped to the front page. Alexander Goldwyn has been aware of these facts since his father's deathbed confession 5 years ago, the report stated. Subject has spent considerable resources attempting to locate Nathaniel Whitmore, not to make amends for his father's crimes, but to ensure that the truth never comes to light. Alexander's current financial crisis makes the Whitmore inheritance critical to his survival. But the most chilling part was highlighted in yellow. Subject has researched methods used by his father to eliminate threats to the family business. Pattern suggests Alexander may be planning similar action against N. Whitmore if diplomatic acquisition of inheritance fails. I found another folder labeled Celeste Whitmore, Surveillance Report. Inside were photographs of my daughter taken over the past year, at her job, at the grocery store, at the coffee shop where she met Alexander for their first date. The photos were time-stamped weeks before that supposed chance encounter. "He stalked her," I whispered. "He studied her, learned her routines, her favorite places, and then orchestrated their meeting." Margaret nodded grimly. "And look at this," She showed me a psychological profile that made my stomach turn. It detailed Celeste's insecurities about our modest lifestyle, her dreams of wealth and status, her complicated feelings about me working as a gardener. Alexander had used all of this information to present himself as her perfect escape from the life she was embarrassed by. The final document in the envelope was a contract, an agreement between Richard Goldwyn and someone called the Meridian Group for permanent problem resolution services. The date was just 3 days before my accident in 1975. "Your father was right," Margaret said quietly. "They tried to kill you once, and now Alexander is planning to finish what his father started." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was learning. Not only was I wealthy beyond my wildest dreams, but my daughter had been deliberately targeted and manipulated by the son of the man who had tried to murder me 50 years ago. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" I asked. "Because I needed to be sure you were strong enough to handle it, and because I needed to verify some of these documents with my own sources. Nathaniel, everything in this vault is real. The Goldwyn family destroyed your life once, and now they're trying to do it again through your daughter." I thought about Celeste's angry words at the wedding, about how she had screamed that she was disgusted with our life. She had no idea that the man she married was the son of the monster who had stolen our family's fortune and tried to kill her father. "What's our next move?" I asked. Margaret's expression was deadly serious. "We have 48 hours to claim your inheritance and expose Alexander before he realizes we've found this evidence. But Nathaniel, once we start this process, there's no going back. Alexander will know that his secret is out, and desperate men do desperate things." I looked at the photos of my daughter again, at the evidence of how carefully Alexander had planned her seduction and manipulation. "My daughter is married to a murderer's son who's planning to kill us both for money that already belongs to us." "Yes," Margaret said simply. "The question is, are you ready to fight back?" I gathered up all the documents, my father's letter, and the damning evidence against the Goldwyns. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have power. Real power. Not just money, but the truth. "Let's destroy him," I said. That evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by documents that painted a picture so horrifying, I could barely accept it. But there was one piece of evidence I hadn't fully examined yet, a thick medical file with Celeste's name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were hospital records, DNA test results, and what looked like a forged birth certificate. But it was the genetic analysis report that made my blood freeze in my veins. According to these documents, Celeste wasn't just my adopted daughter. She was my biological child, but the mother listed wasn't my deceased wife. The mother was listed as Victoria Goldwyn, Richard Goldwyn's daughter, Alexander's sister. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Celeste was Alexander's niece. She had married her own uncle, and neither of them knew it. I immediately called Margaret, my voice barely a whisper. "You need to come back. Now." "There's something else in these files that changes everything." She arrived within an hour, and when I showed her the genetic reports, her face went white. "Oh my God, Nathaniel, this means my daughter is married to her uncle," I finished. "But how is this possible? I don't remember any woman named Victoria. I don't remember having a relationship with anyone from the Goldwyn family." Margaret studied the dates on the documents carefully. "These medical records are from 1995, just before your accident. Look at this note from the attending physician. Patient Victoria Goldwyn admitted following violent assault. Pregnancy confirmed. Father of child unknown due to patient's memory suppression following trauma." The pieces were falling into place in the most horrible way possible. Victoria was assaulted, became pregnant with Celeste, but couldn't remember who the father was because of psychological trauma. But according to this, Margaret pointed to another document, Richard Goldwyn had Victoria declared mentally incompetent and took custody of the baby. But then she found another paper. The baby disappeared from the hospital. Someone took her. I felt sick. My wife. My wife somehow got Celeste from that hospital and brought her to me. But why would she do that? How did she even know about any of this? Margaret pulled out her phone and made a quick call. I'm having my investigator look into your wife's background. There has to be a connection we're missing. While we waited, I stared at photos of Celeste as a baby, trying to remember anything about how she came into our lives. I remembered my wife being pregnant, remembered her going to the hospital, remembered bringing a baby home. But now, looking back, those memories felt hazy, almost artificial. Margaret's phone rang. Yes, I see. Are you certain? Send me everything you have. She hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Nathaniel, your wife Elena wasn't just a random woman who happened to work at that hospital. She was Victoria Goldwyn's nurse, and she was also Richard Goldwyn's informant. She was being paid to spy on the Goldwyn family and report back to someone. To who? To your father. Eleanor was working for him, gathering evidence about Richard's business practices. When Victoria was assaulted and became pregnant, Elena realized the child might be yours, because you had been having a secret relationship with Victoria that you couldn't remember due to memory issues from an earlier, smaller accident. I felt like my brain was going to explode. So Elena stole Celeste from the hospital because she knew the baby was mine. More than that, Elena realized that if Richard discovered Celeste was your daughter, he would try to use her as leverage against you, or kill her to eliminate evidence. So she faked your wife's pregnancy, stole Celeste from the hospital, and presented her to you as your own biological child with her. I sat in stunned silence. My entire life had been built on lies, but lies told to protect me and my daughter from a monster. But there's more, Margaret continued. According to the investigator, Victoria Goldwyn was placed in a psychiatric facility after Celeste's disappearance. She's been there for over 25 years, believing her baby died. She doesn't know that Celeste survived, and she doesn't know that her brother Alexander married her own daughter. The moral implications hit me like a truck. We have to tell them. This marriage it's illegal. It's wrong. They're family. Yes, but Nathaniel, think about what this means strategically. Alexander has unknowingly committed incest, which would destroy him socially and legally. But more importantly, if Celeste is Victoria's daughter and your daughter, she has a legitimate claim to part of the Goldwyn fortune too. I stood up, pacing around my small living room. I can't let this continue. I don't care about strategy or money. My daughter is married to her uncle. She has a right to know the truth, and she will know. But we have to be smart about this. If we reveal everything at once, Alexander might panic and do something desperate. Remember, he's already shown he's willing to kill to protect his secrets. I looked at the genetic reports again, at the proof that my daughter's fairy tale marriage was actually a nightmare beyond imagination. How do we tell her? How do you tell someone that their husband is their uncle, that their entire marriage is a lie, and that their father-in-law tried to murder their real father? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, carefully, and with protection. Because once Alexander learns what we know, Celeste won't just be married to a desperate man trying to steal an inheritance. She'll be married to a desperate man who has to keep her quiet about a crime that could destroy not just his fortune, but his entire family's reputation. I realized then that saving my daughter wasn't just about money, or even about exposing Alexander's manipulation. It was about saving her from a situation so twisted and dangerous that she couldn't even imagine it. What's our first step? I asked. Tomorrow morning, you officially claim your inheritance. By noon, you'll be worth $500 million and legally protected from Alexander's forged documents. Then, we approach Victoria Goldwyn. It's time she met her daughter. I nodded, knowing that in the next 24 hours, I would either save my daughter or lose her forever. But I also knew that the truth, no matter how horrible, was better than the lie she was living. The next morning, I signed papers that made me legally one of the wealthiest men in America. $500 million was now officially mine, along with properties I couldn't even remember owning. But all I could think about was my daughter, trapped in a marriage that was more horrifying than she could possibly imagine. Margaret had arranged for us to visit Victoria Goldwyn that afternoon. The psychiatric facility was an hour outside the city, a place that looked more like a luxury resort than a mental hospital. According to the files, Victoria had been paying for her own care with a trust fund, believing she was being treated for depression and memory issues related to her lost baby. But before we could leave for that visit, my phone rang. It was Celeste. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, frightened. It was the first time she had called me Daddy since she was a little girl. "Celeste, sweetheart, where are you?" I'm at home. Alexander's home. "But Daddy, something's wrong. There are men here, and Alexander is acting strange. He keeps asking me questions about you, about our family, about things I don't understand." My blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "He wants to know if you ever told me about having money, or if you ever mentioned the name Whitmore. He keeps saying that you might not be who you pretend to be. Daddy, I'm scared. These men with him, they don't look like businessmen." Margaret was listening on the extension, and her face had gone pale. She quickly wrote a note. "Alexander knows. Someone leaked information." "Celeste, listen to me very carefully," I said. "Do you remember the old oak tree in our backyard, the one with the tire swing?" "Yes, of course. Do you remember what I told you to do if you were ever in real danger?" There was a pause. "When she was young, I had taught her a game. If she ever felt unsafe, she should find a way to get to that oak tree, where I had hidden a spare key and emergency money. It was a father's paranoid precaution that I never thought she'd need." "I remember," she whispered. "Can you get away from the house?" I think so. Alexander is in his office with those men. They've been in there for hours, and I can hear them arguing." "Listen carefully. I want you to tell Alexander that you're going shopping. Take your car, but don't go shopping. Come straight to the old house. Can you do that without raising suspicion?" "Yes, but Daddy." "What's happening?" "Alexander's been so different since the wedding. Cold, like he's not the same person I married." My heart broke for her. "I'll explain everything when you get here. But Celeste, you need to know that I love you, and everything I've done in my life has been to protect you. Even when you thought I was just a poor, embarrassing father. Daddy, I'm sorry about what I said at the wedding. I was angry and confused, and we'll talk about that later. Right now, I just need you to get here safely." After she hung up, Margaret was already on her phone with her security team. "We need to move fast. If Alexander suspects that Nathaniel has claimed his inheritance, he'll know his plan has failed. A desperate man with his resources and connections could do anything." While we waited for Celeste, Margaret briefed me on what her investigators had discovered overnight. "Alexander has been in contact with the same problem resolution company his father used in 1975. Phone records show multiple calls this week." "You mean the people who tried to kill me?" "The same organization, different people. They're still in business, apparently specializing in making inconvenient wealthy people disappear." I felt sick. "He's planning to kill us. Worse. According to intercepted communications, Alexander's plan was to stage a murder-suicide. You were supposed to kill Celeste in a fit of rage over her rejection, then kill yourself. With both of you dead, Alexander would inherit everything as Celeste's husband, using his forged power of attorney documents to claim you had already signed over your assets to him before your mental breakdown." 20 minutes later, Celeste's car pulled into my driveway. She looked around nervously before getting out, as if she expected to be followed. When she walked through the door of her childhood home, I saw the little girl I had raised, scared and looking for her father to make everything okay. But I also saw a young woman who was about to learn that everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. "Daddy, what's going on? Why is Alexander asking about the name Whitmore?" Margaret and I exchanged glances. There was no gentle way to do this. "Celeste, sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth." I took her hands in mine. First, your marriage to Alexander. It's not legal. What do you mean? You and Alexander are related. You're his niece. His father, Richard Goldwyn, is also your grandfather. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. Alexander's family doesn't have any connection to us. Margaret opened the folder with the genetic reports. I'm afraid it's true, Celeste. And there's more. Your father isn't actually poor. He's the heir to one of the largest fortunes in American history. Alexander has known this all along. He didn't fall in love with you. He targeted you to get access to your father's inheritance. Celeste stared at the documents, her hands shaking. You're telling me that Alexander, that he planned everything? That our whole relationship was fake? I'm afraid so. And Celeste, there's something else. The reason he's asking questions about your father today is because his plan has failed. He knows that we've discovered the truth, and desperate men do desperate things. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Answer it, Margaret said. We're recording everything. Hello? Nathaniel Whitmore. The voice was cold, calculating. Alexander, I think we need to talk. I think we do too. You've made some very serious allegations against me. Accusations that could destroy my reputation. I'd like to resolve this misunderstanding for Celeste's sake. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. What kind of resolution did you have in mind? Meet me tonight, alone, the old Whitmore estate in Connecticut. I think it's time you saw your childhood home again. And Nathaniel, bring the documents you stole from my father's files. All of them. The line went dead. Margaret was already shaking her head. It's a trap, she said. He's planning to kill you at your family's estate, probably make it look like you had a breakdown, returning to the place where your memories were lost. But I was looking at Celeste, who was still processing the fact that her marriage was incestuous and her husband was a murderer's son who had manipulated her entire life. He's right about one thing, I said. It is time to finish this, but I'm not going alone. Margaret spent the next hour trying to talk me out of meeting Alexander, but I had made up my mind. My daughter had been living a lie, married to a monster who was planning to kill us both. This had to end tonight. At least let my security team come with you, Margaret insisted. We can position them around the estate before you arrive. No. If Alexander sees anyone else, he'll know it's a setup. He might hurt Celeste to get to me. Celeste, who had been quiet since learning the truth about her marriage, finally spoke up. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, I said immediately. You're staying here where it's safe. Safe? She laughed bitterly. Daddy, I've been married to my uncle for 3 months. I've been sleeping next to a man who manipulated my entire life, who was planning to kill my father. There is no safe anymore. Margaret pulled out detailed floor plans of the Whitmore estate. According to these blueprints, there are multiple entrances and several hidden passages your father built during the Cold War. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. As we planned our approach, Celeste kept staring at the photographs of Alexander from the surveillance files. I keep thinking about our wedding night, she said quietly. He seemed different after the ceremony, like he was relieved about something, but not happy. I thought it was just wedding stress, but now you know he was relieved because phase 1 of his plan was complete, Margaret said. He had successfully isolated you from your father and established legal claim to your family's fortune. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. If you're planning anything clever, remember that I know where Celeste is at all times. Come alone, or she dies first. Celeste grabbed my phone and typed back, "This is Celeste. I'll be coming with my father. We end this tonight." "What are you doing?" I asked. "Calling his bluff. Alexander thinks he's been playing chess, but he doesn't know that we know about the incest. That's our trump card." Margaret looked worried. "Celeste, you don't understand how dangerous this man is. He's killed before." "No, Margaret, you don't understand. I've been living with him for 3 months. I've seen the real Alexander when he thinks no one is watching. He's not just dangerous, he's unraveling. The financial pressure, the stress of maintaining his lies, it's destroying him. Men like that make mistakes. She was right. As we drove toward Connecticut in Margaret's armored vehicle, I realized that my daughter was stronger than I had ever given her credit for. The shame and embarrassment she had felt about our modest life hadn't made her weak. It had made her determined to never be powerless again. The Whitmore estate appeared through the trees like something from a Gothic novel. Even in the moonlight, I could see that it was massive, the kind of generational wealth that shapes American history. Looking at it, I felt a strange stirring of memory, like déjà vu that wouldn't quite surface. Alexander's car was already there, parked in the circular driveway like he owned the place. There were no other vehicles visible, but that didn't mean we were alone. "Remember," Margaret said through our earpieces, "I'll be monitoring from the security van. If things go wrong, get out immediately. The money isn't worth your lives." Celeste and I walked up the front steps together. The massive oak doors opened before we could knock. Alexander stood there in an expensive suit, but he looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, hands that trembled slightly. When he saw Celeste, his expression softened for just a moment, and I realized that part of him actually had fallen in love with her, even though the relationship started as manipulation. "Celeste, darling, you shouldn't be here. This is between your father and me." "Is it?" she asked coldly. "Because I think it's also between a woman and the uncle who tricked her into an incestuous marriage." Alexander's face went white. He hadn't expected her to know. "I see you've been busy uncovering family secrets," he said, trying to regain his composure. "Please come in. We have a lot to discuss." The interior of the estate was exactly as it appeared in the old photographs. Grand staircases, oil paintings, furniture that cost more than most people's houses. But as we walked through the rooms, I felt those strange stirrings of memory again. A child running down these hallways, voices calling my name, the smell of my mother's perfume. Alexander led us to what had obviously been my father's study. The walls were lined with books, and there was a massive desk with family photographs that included pictures of me as a young boy. "Your father was a brilliant man," Alexander said, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. "Brilliant enough to hide evidence that could destroy my family for generations. Evidence of what your father did to me," I said. "Evidence of attempted murder. Evidence of so much more than that." Alexander walked to a portrait on the wall and swung it aside, revealing a hidden safe. "Your father didn't just gather proof of one crime, Nathaniel. He documented decades of Goldwyn family business practices. Murder, bribery, stolen patents, destroyed lives. If this information ever became public, it wouldn't just destroy me. It would topple a dozen other wealthy families who were involved." He pulled out a thick folder and threw it on the desk. "This is why I need your inheritance. Not for the money itself, but for the power to keep these secrets buried. $500 million buys a lot of silence." Celeste picked up some of the documents, and her face went pale. "There are names here. Senators, judges, business leaders. This is how the world really works," Alexander said. "Your father was naive enough to think he could expose it all, and somehow justice would prevail. But justice doesn't exist at this level of wealth and power. There is only survival." I studied Alexander's face and realized something that chilled me to the bone. "You're not just trying to steal my inheritance. You're trying to save your own life. There are people who will kill you if these secrets come out." Alexander nodded slowly. "People who make my father look like a choir boy. People who have been waiting 50 years for these documents to surface so they can eliminate everyone who knows about them." "Including Celeste," I said. "Including all of us," Alexander confirmed, "which is why we need to make a deal. You sign over the inheritance to me, I use the money and influence to keep us all safe, and we disappear. New identities, new lives, far away from here." Celeste looked at me, then at Alexander. "There's just one problem with your plan." "What's that?" She smiled coldly. "I'd rather die than spend another day married to my uncle." That's when Alexander pulled out the gun. The gun in Alexander's hand changed everything, not just because he was pointing it at us, but because of what I saw in his eyes, pure desperation. This wasn't the cold, calculating man who had manipulated my daughter. This was someone who had run out of options and time. "Alexander, put the gun down," Celeste said with a calmness that amazed me. "This isn't you. You don't know who I am," he screamed, and I could see he was on the edge of a complete breakdown. "You think you married some charming prince, but I've been living in terror for years. You have no idea what these people are capable of." Through our earpieces, I could hear Margaret frantically coordinating with law enforcement, but I knew they wouldn't arrive in time. It was just the three of us in this room, full of family secrets and 50 years of lies. "Tell me about these people," I said, trying to keep him talking. "Who's been threatening you?" Alexander wiped sweat from his forehead with his free hand, the gun still trained on us. "The Meridian Group, the same organization my father used to try to kill you. They've been blackmailing my family for decades, taking a percentage of everything we earn in exchange for their silence about our business methods. So your father never really escaped justice," I realized. "He just traded one master for another." "Exactly. And when he died, they transferred the debt to me. But the financial markets have been brutal, and I can't keep up with their payments anymore. They gave me 6 months to find a solution, or they'll eliminate the problem permanently." Celeste took a small step forward. "By eliminating you. By eliminating all of us," Alexander corrected. "They know about you now, Celeste. They know about your father's inheritance. The only way any of us survive is if I can pay them enough to buy our freedom." I felt a chill as the full scope of the trap became clear. "That's why you needed the inheritance so badly, not for luxury or power, but for survival. $500 million is enough to buy our way out," Alexander said. "Enough to disappear completely and start over somewhere they can't find us. And if we refuse," Alexander's hand tightened on the gun, "then we all die tonight. Because I called them before you arrived. They're on their way here now. If I can't hand them a solution in the next hour, they'll solve the problem their own way." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. I looked around at the study where my father had spent his final years, gathering evidence against the very people who were now threatening us. "There has to be another way," I said. "There is no other way," Alexander shouted. "Don't you understand? These aren't normal criminals. They have people in the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department. They've been operating for over 50 years, and no one has ever been able to touch them." That's when I noticed something I had missed before. On my father's desk, underneath the scattered documents, was a letter with my name on it, in my father's handwriting. While Alexander was focused on Celeste, I carefully slid it toward me. "My dear son," it read, "if you are reading this in the presence of danger, remember that this room holds more than just evidence of crime. Look to the place where we used to read stories together when you were small." A memory suddenly surfaced, sitting in a window seat with my father, reading adventure books about treasure hunters and secret passages. I looked toward the large window that overlooked the estate grounds, and I could see the built-in bench with storage underneath. But before I could move toward it, Alexander noticed what I was doing. "What's that letter?" he demanded. "Nothing important," I said, but he stepped closer, pointing the gun directly at my chest. "Give it to me." That's when Celeste made her move. She grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from the desk and hurled it at Alexander's gun hand. The weapon went off, the bullet shattering a window, and in the confusion that followed, I dove for the window seat. Inside the storage compartment, my hands found exactly what my father had hidden there. Another gun, loaded and ready, along with a note that said simply, "Trust no one. Protect Celeste. End this." When I turned around, Alexander was struggling with Celeste for control of his weapon. Without thinking, I pointed my father's gun and shouted, "Stop!" Everyone froze. Alexander looked at me with a mixture of fear and surprise. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "Even if you kill me, they're still coming. The Meridian Group doesn't forgive debts, and they don't leave witnesses. Through the broken window, I could hear the sound of vehicles approaching. Multiple cars, moving fast. "That's them," Alexander said, his voice now filled with hopeless resignation. "We're all dead." But I was looking at something else my father had left in that window seat, a small electronic device with a single red button and a note. "Emergency broadcast system. All evidence will be transmitted simultaneously to every major news outlet in the country. Use only if no other option remains." I realized then that my father had spent his final years not just gathering evidence, but preparing for exactly this moment. He had set up a failsafe that would expose everything if his family was ever threatened again. "Alexander," I said, "what if I told you there was a third option? A way to destroy the Meridian Group instead of running from them?" He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "That's impossible. No one has ever been able to touch them. No one has ever had 50 years of detailed evidence about their operation," I corrected. "No one has ever been able to broadcast that evidence to every journalist, law enforcement agency, and government official in the country simultaneously." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. We had maybe 2 minutes before armed men would be breaking down the door. "You're talking about suicide," Alexander said. "If you expose them, they'll kill us all before the story even breaks." "Maybe," I admitted. "But Celeste, what do you think? Should we run and hide for the rest of our lives, or should we fight back?" My daughter looked at me with the same determination I had seen when she was a little girl refusing to give up on a difficult puzzle. "Let's end this, Daddy, for good." I put my finger on the red button, knowing that pressing it would either save us or get us all killed. But I also knew that my father had spent his life fighting these monsters, and he had passed that fight to me. The front door of the estate burst open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallways, getting closer. It was time to make a choice that would determine not just our survival, but whether 50 years of crimes would finally see justice. The footsteps were getting closer, but before I could press that red button, a voice called out from the hallway that made my blood freeze. "Alexander, darling, we need to talk." It was a woman's voice, elegant and refined, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Alexander's face went white as death. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She's supposed to be dead?" The voice called out, clearly having heard him. "Oh, my dear boy, rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated." A woman appeared in the doorway, and I felt like I was looking at a ghost. She was perhaps 60 years old, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. But what shocked me most was how familiar she looked, like an older version of Celeste. "Hello, Nathaniel," she said warmly. "I'm Victoria Goldwyn. I believe you knew me many years ago, though you may not remember." Victoria, the woman whose medical files we had found, Alexander's sister, Celeste's biological mother, the woman who was supposed to be in a psychiatric facility. "That's impossible," Celeste breathed. "You're supposed to be mentally ill, institutionalized." "Oh, my dear child, that was a very useful fiction that allowed me to work from the shadows for 25 years. Alexander was backing away from his sister, the gun still in his hand, but now trembling uncontrollably. "Victoria, what are you doing here? How did you get out of—" "Alexander, I was never a patient in that facility. I was the owner. I've been running the Meridian Group since Father died." Victoria's smile was cold as winter. "Did you really think I would let his empire crumble under your incompetent management?" The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Victoria wasn't a victim. She was the puppet master pulling all the strings. "You've been blackmailing your own brother," I said. "I've been managing family assets," Victoria corrected. "Alexander never had the stomach for the family business. Too emotional, too weak. Just like tonight, pointing guns at people instead of thinking strategically." She walked into the room like she owned it, and I noticed she wasn't alone. 2 men in expensive suits followed her, but unlike Alexander's desperate energy, they moved with the calm confidence of professionals. "You see, Nathaniel, when you disappeared 50 years ago, it created a problem. Your father had evidence that could destroy not just our family, but a network of influential people who had invested heavily in our services. We needed that evidence contained. So you've been looking for me all this time. We've been monitoring the situation. When Alexander told me he had found you through your daughter, I saw an opportunity to resolve multiple problems at once. Victoria looked at Celeste with something that might have been maternal affection. Hello, darling. You're even more beautiful than in the photographs. Celeste stared at the woman who was simultaneously her mother, her mother-in-law, and the head of a criminal organization. You're my mother. Biologically, yes, though I must say Nathaniel did an excellent job raising you, much better than I could have done under the circumstances. What circumstances? I demanded. Victoria's expression darkened. The circumstances of your father destroying my life, my family, and my future. Did you really think you could expose our business practices without consequences? Your father cost us billions of dollars and dozens of important relationships. Your father was a criminal who tried to have me killed. My father was protecting his family's legacy, just as I'm protecting it now. Victoria gestured to her men, who stepped closer to us. But I'm not unreasonable. I'm prepared to offer you a deal. Alexander was looking between his sister and us with growing panic. Victoria, you can't trust them. They have evidence that could— Shut up, Alexander. Victoria's voice cut like a blade. Your incompetence forced my hand. If you had simply married the girl and gained access to the inheritance quietly, none of this would have been necessary. What kind of deal? I asked, though I was still holding the emergency broadcast device behind my back. You sign over your inheritance to a trust that I control. In exchange, I allow you and Celeste to live. You'll be relocated, given new identities, and as long as you never speak about what you've learned, you'll be safe. And Alexander? Victoria looked at her brother with cold disappointment. Alexander has outlived his usefulness. He was supposed to be a simple tool to access your money, but he's become emotionally attached to your daughter. That makes him unreliable. Alexander raised his gun toward his sister. I won't let you hurt Celeste. You won't let me? Victoria laughed. You weak, pathetic little boy. You think pointing a gun at me changes anything? I've been planning this moment for 25 years. That's when I realized the true scope of her manipulation. You arranged everything. Not just Alexander meeting Celeste, but the timing of my memory recovery, the discovery of the inheritance documents. You wanted me to find out who I really was. Very good. Yes, I needed you to officially claim your inheritance so I could legally take control of it. A missing heir is useless, but a living heir who signs the right documents, that's worth $500 million. Celeste stepped closer to me. And what about the fact that Alexander and I are related? Did you plan that too? Victoria's smile was the most chilling thing I had ever seen. My dear child, you were never supposed to find out about that. The marriage was meant to be temporary, just long enough to establish legal claim to the money. After that, she shrugged elegantly. After that, you would have killed us both, I finished. Nothing so dramatic. A tragic accident, perhaps. Or a murder-suicide. Grief-stricken father kills daughter and himself after learning about her shameful marriage. These things happen in wealthy families more often than people realize. The casual way she discussed murdering her own daughter and the man who had raised her was more terrifying than any gun. This woman was a monster who had been planning our deaths for decades. Alexander was still pointing his gun at Victoria, but his hands were shaking so badly I doubted he could hit anything. I won't let you hurt them, he repeated. Oh, Alexander, Victoria sighed. You really don't understand, do you? Those men outside aren't here to help us. They're here to clean up the mess you've made, all of us. Through the broken window, I could see the truth of her words. The vehicles in the driveway weren't just cars. They were vans, equipped for a very different kind of business, the kind that left no witnesses. Victoria had played us all, including her own brother. We weren't just fighting for money anymore. We were fighting for our lives against a woman who had spent 25 years planning the perfect crime. I looked at the red button in my hand, knowing that pressing it might be our only chance. But I also knew that Victoria was right about one thing. If we exposed everything, we might not live long enough to see justice served. The question was, would it be better to die fighting or to live as victims of her manipulation forever? The standoff in that room felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only seconds. Alexander pointing his gun at Victoria, Victoria's men positioning themselves strategically, and me holding the device that could either save us or get us killed faster. That's when something unexpected happened. Alexander slowly lowered his weapon and looked directly at me. "Nathaniel," he said quietly, "I know you have every reason to hate me. I manipulated your daughter. I tried to steal your inheritance, and I've been lying since the moment we met. But right now, we need each other." Victoria laughed coldly. "How touching. The failed businessman wants to team up with his victims." "I know my sister better than anyone," Alexander continued, ignoring her. "She's been planning this for decades, and she always has contingency plans for her contingency plans. Those men outside, they're not just cleanup crew. They're here to eliminate everyone who knows about the Meridian Group, including her own family." I studied Victoria's face and saw the truth in Alexander's words. There was no warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, no familial affection. He was just another loose end to be tied up. "You're right," I said to Alexander. "But what can we do? She controls everything." Alexander reached into his jacket slowly, and Victoria's men tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a cell phone. "Not everything. Before I came here tonight, I uploaded every file from my father's private safe to a cloud server. Financial records, client lists, evidence of murders going back 50 years. If I don't check in every hour, it all gets automatically sent to every major news outlet in the country." Victoria's composed expression cracked for the first time. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You taught me never to enter a negotiation without leverage." "Well, sister dear, this is my leverage." Celeste, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "There's something both of you don't know." She was looking at Victoria with a strange expression. "I've been married to Alexander for 3 months. I've been living in his house, sleeping in his bed, and I've seen things." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Alexander talks in his sleep. For weeks he's been having nightmares about someone named Victoria who was supposed to be dead but was actually alive and planning something terrible. I thought he was just stressed about business, but now I understand. Subconsciously he knew his sister was alive and manipulating him." Alexander stared at Celeste in shock. "You knew?" "I suspected something was wrong, and I did some investigating of my own." Celeste pulled out her own phone. "While you were planning to steal my father's inheritance, I was documenting everything. Photos of your private papers, recordings of your phone calls, evidence of your meetings with mysterious people." Victoria's face had gone pale. "What exactly do you have?" "Everything," Celeste said simply, "including proof that you've been embezzling money from the Meridian Group for years, skimming off the top and hiding it in personal accounts. I don't think your business partners would be very happy to learn that their trusted leader has been stealing from them." The room fell silent, except for the sound of vehicles outside. More cars had arrived, and I could hear men talking in low voices. Victoria looked at her watch. "Very clever, all of you. But you're forgetting something important. In about 5 minutes, this entire estate is going to be burned to the ground, with all of us inside it. My partners don't believe in leaving evidence behind." "Your partners?" Alexander asked. "Did you really think I could run an organization like the Meridian Group alone?" "I have investors, Alexander. Very powerful, very dangerous people who don't appreciate complications. When I told them about the Whitmore inheritance situation, they decided it was time to close this chapter permanently." Through the window, I could see men in dark clothes moving around the estate with what looked like gasoline cans. They were preparing to burn the place down with us inside. "So what's your endgame, Victoria?" I asked. "Kill all the witnesses and take the money." "The money was never the real prize," Victoria said. "The real prize is the complete destruction of evidence that could implicate dozens of powerful people in 50 years of crimes." Your father's documents, your inheritance, even the three of you. It all disappears tonight in a tragic fire. Alexander suddenly grabbed Celeste's hand. The hidden passages. Your father built escape routes during the Cold War. I studied the blueprints when I was planning to kill you both. I felt another surge of memory, running through narrow corridors as a child, playing hide and seek with my father in secret rooms built into the walls of the estate. There's a passage behind the bookshelf, I said, the memory becoming clearer. It leads to a tunnel that comes out near the old stables, about half a mile from the main house. Victoria's men were moving closer to the study door. We could hear their footsteps in the hallway. Even if we escape, Celeste said, they'll hunt us down. We can't run forever. We're not going to run, I said, finally understanding what my father had really prepared for. We're going to fight back, but not the way Victoria expects. I held up the emergency broadcast device. This doesn't just send evidence to news outlets. According to my father's notes, it also sends a signal to the FBI task force that's been investigating the Meridian Group for the past 10 years. Victoria's eyes widened. That's impossible. We have people in every law enforcement agency. Not in this task force. My father spent his final years working with a secret group of federal agents who were operating completely off the books. If I press this button, they'll know exactly where we are and exactly what evidence to look for. Alexander looked between the device in my hands and his sister's increasingly panicked expression. Do it, he said. Whatever happens to me, I don't want to live knowing I helped her destroy innocent people. Victoria raised her hand and her men drew their weapons. If you press that button, we all die in the next 60 seconds. If I don't press it, we die in the next 5 minutes, I replied. At least this way, justice has a chance. Celeste took my other hand. I'm proud of you, Daddy. For the first time in my life, I understand what real courage looks like. I looked at my daughter, this brave, intelligent woman who had been manipulated and betrayed but was still standing strong. And I knew what I had to do. Victoria, I said, this is for my father, for Celeste, and for every person your family has destroyed over the past 50 years. I pressed the button. The moment I pressed that button, everything changed. Not immediately. There was no dramatic explosion or sudden rescue, but I could see in Victoria's eyes that she knew her carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart. You have no idea what you've just done, she said, her voice deadly calm. That signal doesn't just alert the FBI. It alerts everyone, including people who will kill federal agents to protect their secrets. Through the broken window, I could hear new sounds, helicopters in the distance, vehicles approaching fast, but I couldn't tell if they were coming to rescue us or to make sure none of us survived the night. Alexander was at the bookshelf, running his hands along the spines of books, looking for the mechanism to open the hidden passage. Nathaniel, how does this work? I close my eyes, trying to remember. The red leather book about the Civil War, pull it halfway out, then push it back in. The bookshelf swung inward with a soft, grinding sound, revealing a narrow corridor that disappeared into darkness. There's no time, Victoria said. My men are already in position. Even if you escape through that tunnel, they'll be waiting at the other end. Maybe, I said, but at least we'll die fighting instead of waiting to be executed. That's when Celeste did something that shocked all of us. She walked directly up to Victoria and slapped her across the face. That's for stealing my childhood, she said, and this is for lying to my father for 50 years. She slapped her again, harder. Victoria's men raised their weapons, but Victoria held up a hand to stop them. Brave little girl. Just like your father was brave when he thought he could expose us all those years ago. The difference is, Celeste said, I'm not alone. She pulled out her phone and showed us the screen. She had been live streaming our entire conversation on social media. Thousands of people were watching in real time as Victoria confessed to decades of crimes. You recorded everything? Alexander asked in amazement. Everything. Victoria admitting to running the Meridian Group, confessing to planned murders, threatening to burn down this estate with us inside. It's all being broadcast live to the world. Victoria's face went white with rage. "You stupid child! Do you have any idea what you've done? There are people watching this who will kill millions to keep their secrets safe." "Then maybe it's time for those secrets to come out," I said. The sounds outside were getting closer. Definitely helicopters now, and vehicles moving fast. Through the window, I could see lights in the distance, too many to be just Victoria's cleanup crew. Victoria's phone rang, and when she answered it, I could hear shouting from the other end, even from across the room. She hung up after just a few seconds. "Congratulations," she said bitterly. "You've just started a war that will destroy everything. My partners are mobilizing resources you can't imagine. They'll bring down governments if they have to." "Good," Alexander said, surprising everyone. "Maybe it's time this whole corrupt system burned down." I looked at my son-in-law, this man who had manipulated my daughter but was now standing with us against his own sister, and I realized that people could change, even in the darkest circumstances. The helicopters were directly overhead now, and searchlights were sweeping the grounds. Victoria's men outside were shouting to each other, their carefully planned operation descending into chaos. "Victoria," I said, "you have one chance to do the right thing. Tell your men to stand down, cooperate with the authorities, maybe save yourself from the death penalty." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this ends with arrests and trials? You think the justice system can handle what you've unleashed? The people I work for own judges, senators, entire governments. This live stream, your FBI signal, all of it, it just means we have to be more thorough in our cleanup." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, casting eerie shadows around the room. Through the windows, I could see that the power had been cut to the entire estate. "That's the signal," Victoria said. "My partners have arrived." The helicopters were landing now, and I could hear the sound of multiple vehicles surrounding the estate. But these weren't rescue vehicles. These were military-grade operations designed to eliminate every trace of what had happened here. "The tunnel," I said urgently. "We have to go now." Alexander was already in the hidden passage, helping Celeste through. I was about to follow when Victoria grabbed my arm. "Nathaniel, wait. There's something you need to know before you die." "What?" "Your father didn't just gather evidence against my family. He was working with us. The Meridian Group exists because your father created it. Everything we've done for the past 50 years, we learned from him." I stared at her, not wanting to believe it. "You're lying." "Am I? Why do you think you have no memories of your childhood? Why do you think your father built secret passages and hiding places throughout this estate? He wasn't preparing to fight criminals. He was preparing to hide from the authorities when his own crimes were discovered." The sound of boots on the stairs was getting closer. We had maybe 30 seconds before armed men burst through the door. "Even if that's true," I said, "it doesn't matter now. I'm not my father. I choose to fight for justice, not profit. And your daughter will die for your choice." I looked at Celeste, who was waiting for me at the entrance to the hidden passage. Her eyes were bright with determination, not fear. "My daughter will live or die as a free woman fighting for what's right," I said. "That's more than you can say for yourself." I started toward the passage, but Victoria called out one last time. "Nathaniel, the tunnel doesn't lead to the stables anymore. We sealed that exit years ago. You're walking into a trap." I stopped, my blood running cold. If she was telling the truth, we were about to escape into a dead end with armed killers waiting for us at the only exit. But if she was lying, this was just one final manipulation to keep us here until her men arrived. The footsteps were right outside the door now. I had to make a choice. Trust the woman who had orchestrated decades of lies and manipulation, or take our chances in a tunnel that might be our salvation or our tomb. I looked at Celeste and Alexander waiting for me in the darkness of the passage. "Sometimes," I said to Victoria, "you have to have faith that the truth will set you free." I stepped into the tunnel and pulled the bookshelf closed behind us, just as the study door exploded inward. In the darkness, we began what might be our final journey together. A father, his daughter, and the man who had tried to destroy them. but was now their only ally in a fight for survival against forces more powerful and ruthless than any of us had ever imagined. The tunnel was darker than anything I had ever experienced. Our phone flashlights created small circles of light that seemed to be swallowed by the absolute blackness ahead of us. The air was stale and cold, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. "How long is this tunnel?" Celeste whispered. "I don't remember," I admitted. But Victoria could be right about the exit being sealed. My father built this during the Cold War, but 50 years is a long time. Alexander was leading the way, and every few steps he would stop to listen for sounds of pursuit. "They'll figure out where we went eventually," he said. "These walls aren't soundproof." As we moved deeper into the tunnel, I kept thinking about Victoria's final revelation, that my father had created the Meridian Group. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a desperate lie, but another part remembered the sophisticated security systems in this estate, the hidden safes, the careful planning that went into every detail of this place. "Daddy," Celeste said softly, "do you think she was telling the truth about your father?" "I don't know, but even if he was involved in something terrible, that doesn't change who we are or what we're fighting for." We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when Alexander suddenly stopped. "There's something ahead, a door, I think." His flashlight illuminated a heavy metal door set into the stone wall of the tunnel. It looked newer than the tunnel itself, and there was an electronic keypad next to the handle. "This wasn't here in my father's blueprints," I said. Alexander examined the keypad. "It's recent, maybe installed in the last 10 years. But why would someone put a locked door in the middle of an escape tunnel?" That's when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices behind us, distant but getting closer. Victoria's men had found the hidden passage. "We need to get through this door," Celeste said urgently. I stared at the keypad, trying to think. What would my father have used as a code? My birthday? His anniversary? The date of my accident? "Wait," I said, remembering something from his letter. He mentioned the place where we used to read stories together. Maybe I tried the date of my 5th birthday, the last clear memory I had of sitting with him in that window seat, reading adventure books about treasure and hidden passages. The keypad beeped, and the door clicked open. Inside was a small room filled with computer equipment, monitors, and filing cabinets. But what shocked me most was that everything was powered and running. Someone had been using this room recently. "This is a surveillance center," Alexander said, looking at the monitors. "These cameras are watching the entire estate, inside and outside." On the screens, we could see armed men searching the house, Victoria pacing in the study, and helicopters landing on the front lawn. But we could also see something else. FBI vehicles surrounding the estate, agents taking positions behind trees and buildings. "The signal worked," Celeste said. "Help is here." But as we watched, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a simple rescue operation. Victoria's people weren't surrendering. They were preparing for a siege. "Look at this," Alexander called from one of the filing cabinets. He had found a thick folder labeled Operation Whitmore, Final Phase. Inside were detailed plans for tonight's events, but not written by Victoria. The handwriting was different, and the signature at the bottom made me stagger backward. It was signed by Margaret Thornfield. "That's impossible," I breathed. "Margaret is helping us. She's the one who found me, who told me about my inheritance." Celeste was reading over Alexander's shoulder. "According to this, Margaret has been working with the Meridian Group for years. She was supposed to guide you through discovering your inheritance, make sure you signed the right documents, and then eliminate you once the money was transferred." I felt like the world was spinning. Margaret, who had seemed so kind and helpful, who had protected me and given me information about my family, she had been working for Victoria all along. "But why show me all that evidence about Alexander?" I asked. "Why expose Victoria's plan?" Alexander found another document, because Margaret was planning to eliminate Victoria too. According to this, Margaret was working for Victoria's partners, the people Victoria mentioned who would kill millions to keep their secrets safe. They wanted Victoria removed because she was becoming unstable and drawing too much attention. So Margaret was playing all of us, Celeste said. She wanted you to claim your inheritance, wanted you to expose Victoria's crimes, and then she would swoop in to rescue you while actually working for Victoria's bosses. The voices in the tunnel were getting closer. We had maybe 2 minutes before they reached the door. There has to be another way out of here, I said, searching the room frantically. That's when I found my father's final message, a video recording on one of the computers, labeled, "For my son, if all else fails." I clicked play, and my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than in the photographs, tired and scared. "Nathaniel, if you're watching this, then everything has gone wrong. Victoria has found you, and Margaret has revealed her true allegiance." "Yes, son, I knew about Margaret. I've been watching her for years, just as she's been watching us." He leaned closer to the camera. "The truth is more complicated than you know. I didn't create the Meridian Group. I infiltrated it. For 20 years, I worked undercover for a secret government task force, gathering evidence against the most powerful criminal organization in American history. I felt like I could breathe again. My father hadn't been a criminal. He had been a hero. But they discovered my true identity, and that's when they tried to kill you. The accident that took your memories probably saved your life because they believed you were dead. I've spent the last 25 years gathering enough evidence to bring them all down, but I needed someone I could trust to finish the mission. The voices in the tunnel were right outside the door now. There's a final exit from this room, behind the false wall next to the main computer. But Nathaniel, using it will trigger an explosive charge that will collapse this entire tunnel system. You'll escape, but anyone still in these tunnels will be trapped forever." I looked at the wall he had indicated and saw the hidden panel. "The choice is yours, son. Save yourself and your daughter, or try to save everyone, including the people who have spent their lives trying to destroy us." The door to the room shook as someone tried to force it open. We had seconds to decide. I looked at Celeste and Alexander. "What do you think?" Alexander surprised me. "Those men following us aren't innocent victims. They're killers who chose to work for Victoria. But the FBI agents outside, if we collapse the tunnels, some of them might be caught in the blast, too." Celeste was studying the surveillance monitors. "Look," she said, pointing to one screen. "Margaret just arrived. She's talking to the FBI commander, probably telling him lies about what's really happening here." I realized that even if we escaped, Margaret would convince law enforcement that we were the criminals. She would use her carefully constructed false evidence to paint us as the masterminds behind decades of Meridian Group crimes. "There's only one way to end this," I said. "We have to get back up there and expose Margaret in front of the FBI with proof of what she's really doing." "That's suicide," Alexander said. "Victoria's men will kill us the moment we surface." "Maybe," I said. "But my father didn't spend his life fighting these monsters just so I could run away when things got difficult." The door was giving way. I could hear Victoria's men shouting orders. I made my decision and reached for the hidden panel that would lead us back into the heart of danger, knowing that in the next few minutes we would either finally bring justice to the Meridian Group or die trying. The hidden panel opened to reveal a ladder leading straight up to what my father's notes indicated was the old wine cellar. As we climbed, I could hear the explosion behind us as Victoria's men blasted through the door we had just abandoned. They would find the surveillance room, but by then we would be gone. The wine cellar was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Stone walls lined with dusty bottles, the air thick with the smell of age and fermentation. But what I didn't remember was the arsenal my father had hidden there. Weapons, ammunition, body armor, and communication equipment that looked military grade. "Your father was serious about this war," Alexander said, strapping on a bulletproof vest. I found a radio tuned to FBI frequencies and listened to the chatter. Margaret was indeed talking to the federal agents, but what she was telling them made my blood boil. "The suspects are Nathaniel Whitmore, his daughter Celeste, and Alexander Goldwyn." Her voice crackled through the radio. "They've been running an extortion scheme against wealthy families for years. Nathaniel Whitmore is the head of the Meridian Group, using his fake identity as a poor gardener to avoid suspicion." She's turned everything upside down, Celeste said angrily. She's making us the criminals. Through the wine cellar's small windows, I could see FBI agents surrounding the estate. They weren't here to rescue us. They were here to arrest us. We need evidence, I said. Something that proves Margaret is lying and working for the real Meridian Group. Alexander was examining the communication equipment. This radio can broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously. If we can get Margaret to confess while transmitting to both the FBI and the media, she'll never confess knowingly, Celeste pointed out. Then we don't tell her she's being recorded. I found my father's phone, which contained contacts I didn't recognize, but that looked official. People with titles like Deputy Director and Task Force Leader. I called the first number. Agent Harrison, a gruff voice answered. This is Nathaniel Whitmore. I think you've been expecting this call. There was a pause. Jesus Christ, you're alive. We've been waiting 25 years for you to surface. Where are you? I'm at the Whitmore estate, and I'm about to expose the real head of the Meridian Group. But the FBI agents on scene have been fed false information by a double agent named Margaret Thornfield. Thornfield? She's the one who contacted us about your location. She said you were dangerous. She's working for the people my father spent his life investigating. I need you to listen very carefully. While I explained the situation to Agent Harrison, Celeste and Alexander were monitoring the surveillance feeds from the wine cellar. Victoria was no longer in the house. She had escaped during the chaos, probably through another exit we didn't know about. There, Celeste pointed to one of the monitors. Margaret is talking to someone on her phone. She's walking away from the other agents. I could see her on the screen, pacing near the edge of the estate grounds, clearly agitated. This was our chance. Agent Harrison, I need you to patch this call through to the FBI commander on site, but don't tell him who's calling. Just tell him it's a source with information about Margaret Thornfield. What are you planning? I'm going to call Margaret and get her to confess. You record everything and use it to prove to your people that they're being manipulated. And if she doesn't confess, then we're all going to die tonight, and the Meridian Group wins. Agent Harrison patched me through to the FBI commander, and I called Margaret's number while broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Nathaniel! Margaret's voice was frantic when she answered. Thank God you're alive. Where are you? The FBI is here, but there are some complications. What kind of complications? They think you're the head of a criminal organization. Someone has been feeding them false information about you and your family. I almost admired how smoothly she lied. Margaret, I need your help. Can you meet me at the old stables? There's something I need to show you. Of course, I'll be right there. Alexander was already moving toward the wine cellar exit. The stables are on the opposite side of the estate from where the FBI is positioned. If we can get Margaret there alone, we can force her to admit the truth, I finished. As we made our way through the darkness toward the stables, I could hear Agent Harrison's voice through my earpiece, coordinating with the FBI commander. They were starting to realize that Margaret's story didn't add up. The old stables were exactly where I remembered them, though they had fallen into disrepair over the decades. Margaret was already there when we arrived, but she wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits flanked her, the same men who had been with Victoria earlier. I'm disappointed, Nathaniel, Margaret said as her men pointed weapons at us. I had hoped you would be more cooperative. Cooperative with what? Signing over my inheritance to criminals? Cooperative with ending this quietly. Your father was supposed to disappear 25 years ago. When he survived and went into hiding, it created complications. We've been cleaning up those complications ever since. Through my earpiece, I could hear Agent Harrison confirming that every word was being recorded and transmitted to FBI headquarters. What complications? I asked, trying to keep her talking. Your father gathered evidence against some very important people. Politicians, judges, business leaders, people who can't afford to have their secrets exposed. The Meridian Group exists to manage those secrets, and I've been managing the Meridian Group for the past 15 years. And Victoria? Margaret laughed coldly. Victoria was a useful figurehead, but she became unstable, emotional. She actually started to care about her family members, which made her unreliable. Tonight was supposed to eliminate Victoria, you, and everyone else who knew too much, including the FBI agents you called here, especially them. By morning, the official story will be that the Whitmore estate was destroyed in a gas explosion after a shootout between federal agents and the Meridian Group terrorists. No survivors, no evidence, no complications. Alexander stepped forward. And my sister, what happened to Victoria? Victoria served her purpose. She's no longer a factor in this equation. The casual way Margaret discussed Victoria's murder was chilling, but it was also exactly what Agent Harrison needed to hear. Margaret, I said, you've just confessed to conspiracy, murder, and planning to kill federal agents. I hope it was worth it. Her expression changed as she realized something was wrong. She looked at the phone in my hand, which was still connected to Agent Harrison's line. You clever bastard, she said. But it doesn't matter. In about 30 seconds, this entire area is going to be lit up by sniper fire. My people have been positioning themselves around the estate all evening. And that's when the lights hit us. Searchlights from helicopters that had been circling silently in the darkness. But these weren't Margaret's helicopters. They were FBI aircraft, and they were illuminating the positions of Margaret's snipers. This is Agent Harrison, FBI, a voice boomed from loudspeakers. Margaret Thornfield, you and your associates are under arrest. Surrender your weapons immediately. Margaret's men looked around nervously as FBI agents emerged from the darkness surrounding us. Margaret herself seemed stunned that her carefully laid plans were falling apart. This is impossible, she said. We own people in every agency. This operation was approved at the highest levels. Not anymore, Agent Harrison's voice came through my earpiece and the helicopter loudspeakers simultaneously. Thanks to your confession and the evidence Nathaniel's father gathered, we've identified and arrested your people in 12 different agencies. The Meridian Group is finished. Margaret raised her gun toward me one last time. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. But before she could fire, Celeste tackled her from the side. The gun went off harmlessly into the air as both women fell to the ground. FBI agents swarmed the area, arresting Margaret and her men. As I helped Celeste to her feet, I realized that we had actually done it. We had exposed the Meridian Group and survived. But as I looked around at the dozens of federal agents securing the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was too easy. Margaret had seemed genuinely surprised by the FBI's response, but someone as careful as her wouldn't have been caught so completely off guard unless there was still something we didn't know. Something even bigger than the Meridian Group itself. 3 hours later, we were sitting in what used to be my father's study, giving statements to FBI agents while crime scene investigators catalogued evidence throughout the estate. Agent Harrison, a weathered man in his 60s who looked like he'd seen everything, was debriefing us personally. Your father was one of the best undercover agents we ever had, he told me. 25 years ago, when we thought you were dead and he was compromised, he convinced us to let him disappear. We've been in limited contact ever since, waiting for the right moment to bring down the entire network. Alexander, who had been surprisingly helpful during the arrests, looked exhausted. So what happens now? Margaret's in custody, Victoria is missing, and the Meridian Group is exposed. That's where things get complicated, Agent Harrison said. Margaret wasn't lying about having people in high places. In the past 3 hours, we've arrested 2 federal judges, a senator, 3 CEOs of major corporations, and at least 12 other officials. This goes deeper than we ever imagined. Celeste, who had been quiet since the confrontation at the stables, finally spoke up. But it's over, right? We can go back to our normal lives. Agent Harrison exchanged glances with his partner. That's what we need to discuss. Nathaniel, your inheritance is legally yours, $500 million plus properties and investments. But there's something your father never told you about that money. He opened a thick file and pulled out documents I had never seen before. Your inheritance isn't just family wealth. For the past 50 years, your father has been using Whitmore money to fund secret government operations that Congress never approved. Black ops missions, intelligence gathering, even some activities that, well, let's say they exist in a legal grey area. I stared at the papers, feeling a familiar sense of having my world turned upside down. Are you saying my father was funding illegal government activities? I'm saying your father was funding necessary activities that saved American lives, but that couldn't be traced back to any official agency. The Whitmore fortune has been the secret budget for operations that have prevented terrorist attacks, stopped foreign assassinations of American officials, and gathered intelligence that kept this country safe. Alexander leaned forward. So the money comes with strings attached. The money comes with a responsibility, Agent Harrison corrected. Nathaniel, your father spent his life fighting the kind of corruption that the Meridian Group represented. But he also spent his life supporting the kind of patriots who work in the shadows to protect American interests. The question is, are you willing to continue that legacy? I looked around the study where my father had planned his final mission, at the hidden passages and secret rooms that had saved our lives, at the evidence of a man who had dedicated everything to fighting for justice. What exactly are you asking me to do? We're asking you to become what your father was, the unofficial bank for American heroes who can't get funding through traditional channels. There are agents working undercover in China, operatives preventing nuclear materials from reaching terrorists, cyber warriors fighting digital battles that never make the news. They need support, and that support has to come from sources the enemy can't trace. Celeste took my hand. Daddy, it's your choice. But whatever you decide, I'll support you. I thought about the past week, about learning I was wealthy, about discovering my daughter had been manipulated into an incestuous marriage, about fighting against a criminal organization that had terrorized families for decades. I thought about the men and women who had risked their lives tonight to bring justice to people who thought they were above the law. Agent Harrison, if I agree to this, what guarantees do I have that this money won't be used for the same kind of corruption we just exposed? You have my word, and the word of the task force your father helped create. But more than that, you have oversight. Every operation funded with Whitmore money gets reviewed by a committee that includes you. You're not just writing checks, you're helping make decisions about how to protect American lives. I stood up and walked to the window where my father and I had once read adventure stories together. Outside, I could see FBI vehicles still processing the scene, but I could also see the sun beginning to rise over the estate that had been my childhood home. There's one more thing, Agent Harrison said quietly. Victoria Goldwyn. I turned around. I thought she escaped. She did, but she contacted us an hour ago. She wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Victoria says she has information about Meridian Group operations in 12 countries, including the identities of foreign agents who have been working to destabilize American interests. She's willing to trade that information for immunity and witness protection. Alexander looked shocked. Victoria wants to cooperate? Apparently, learning that her daughter was raised by the man she'd spent years trying to destroy has given her a different perspective on things. She says she wants to make amends for the damage her family has caused. I thought about everything Victoria had done, the manipulation, the threats, the casual planning of murders. But I also thought about the fact that she was Celeste's biological mother, and that even the worst people sometimes found ways to seek redemption. What do you think? I asked Celeste. She is your mother. Celeste was quiet for a long moment. I think people can change. And I think forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it might mean giving someone a chance to do better. Agent Harrison nodded. So, what's your decision, Nathaniel? Will you continue your father's work? I looked at my daughter, who had shown incredible courage throughout this ordeal. I looked at Alexander, who had started as our enemy, but had chosen to fight alongside us when it mattered. I thought about my father, who had spent his life in the shadows, protecting people who would never know his name. I'll do it, I said, but with conditions. Celeste gets full access to all information about operations we're funding. Alexander, if he's willing, becomes our liaison with reformed white-collar criminals who want to make amends by helping law enforcement. And Victoria Victoria gets her chance at redemption, but under strict supervision. Agent Harrison smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Your father would be proud. As the sun fully rose over the Whitmore estate, I realized that my story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. I had spent 70 years as a poor gardener who didn't know his true identity. Now, I would spend however many years I had left as a wealthy man, fighting to make the world a little bit safer and a little bit more just. Celeste hugged me tightly. So what happens next, Daddy? I looked out at the grounds where I had played as a child, where I had nearly died as a young man, and where I had finally learned the truth about my family's legacy. Next, we figure out how to use $500 million to make your grandfather's dream of justice actually come true. But even as I said it, I knew that this was only the end of our first battle. Somewhere out there, other criminal organizations were watching and learning from the Meridian Group's mistakes. Other corrupt officials were covering their tracks and planning new schemes. The war my father started would continue, and now it was my responsibility to fight it. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting alone. I had my daughter, my unlikely allies, and the resources to make a real difference. And sometimes that's all a person needs to change the world.